Hey everyone, it's Theo from Spectrum Gardening. So today I'm going to show you how to install and level out a garden bed. But first I'm going to go over the tools that that's going to be required. First, a tape measure, especially if you're going to be installing multiple garden beds and they're all pre-built. And then this way you can make sure they're exactly the same proportions in between them. And then next off, we're going to need a level. Get the longest one that you have. And if you don't have one long enough to go the width of the whole garden bed, get a long straight piece of wood and then lay it across the width of the garden bed, and you can take the level and stick it right on top of it. And then you're gonna need a trench shovel, or you could use a hand spade, something just with a small blade like this that you're gonna be able to easily dig out the perimeter of the garden bed with. Then we also need a regular shovel. It doesn't have to be a long-handled one like mine. You can use a D-shaped one, a shorter one, like what I showed you earlier, just as long as it's got a nice big blade on it. And then you're also gonna need a pitchfork. And you're gonna need a sledgehammer. So the way that I'm installing the garden beds right now is just on fill. However, if you're gonna be installing it on top of sod, you're also going to need a work knife like this to cut out the sod along the perimeter of the garden bed, and then you can rip it out. And then you're also going to need, optionally, a pitchfork like this, just to rough up the sod inside the garden bed if you like. So I will be going through all the steps in the video, and I'll be explaining why each tool is important. So the first step is to put the garden bed exactly where you want it so you can see what you need to work on. Let's go take a look at mine. So this is the last garden bed I actually need to install, and it's kind of sort of where I want it. It's going to be back a little bit from my other ones because I'm taking account for the apple tree here, and I just want it back about 4 feet so I can make trimming the apple tree a little bit easier and picking it a little bit easier in the future. But I actually want it exactly 30 inches away from my other garden bed. So let's take a look how it is. It's 42, so I've got some work to do on this side. And let's see how it is down here. And it's 47 down here. And notice how I'm measuring from the outside of this garden bed versus the inside. The reason I want to do that is because I am losing about a 1 inch width on the garden bed here, and I want the garden beds to be wide enough that I can push my wheelbarrow easily between them. So if you take a look at the other ones that I've already done, you can see that they're pretty much exactly the same width apart, so I can easily push a wheelbarrow in between them. However, there won't be enough room for me to turn around the wheelbarrow or to tip it or to roll it right up to the garden bed, so I'll have to shovel it out. That's the drawback. Typically, I recommend to leave between 3 and 4 feet between each garden bed. However, I'm trying to really maximize the space here and to make sure that I'm trying to get the maximum sun exposure. So I'm kind of putting mine a little bit tighter. So let's get started and let's get this garden bed in place. So now that I have it in place, let's take a look at where I'll need to work on next. So I can already see that that spot over there is a high spot and that's a low spot. One of the most common mistakes that I've seen people do is on a low spot like that over there, they'll take a big rock, they'll take just some extra soil that they have laying around, and they'll put it under the low spot and they'll raise it up to make it level with the high spot. You actually don't want to do that for a couple of reasons. One, because over time, the soil will compact and it will, the rock will move out of place, and then your garden bed will be off level. And you're also not addressing the gap on the bottom of that. So my next step, I'm going to show you the super easy way to find all those high spots, especially the ones that are not extremely visible like this. So remember that sledgehammer I was talking about earlier? This is the fastest and the easiest way to find your high spots. What I'm going to be doing is walking the perimeter of the garden bed and smacking it on the top. And then those hits are going to make an indent on all the high spots in the soil, and I'm going to know where I'm going to need to dig without having to take out my level right away. So now that you've gone around and you've hit all the perimeter along your garden bed, now it's time to actually check to see how much you'll have to dig down. So let's take a look at the level, and you can see the bubble is pointing quite a bit up that way. So I know that spot, this side's going to be high. Now let's take a look at the other side. And this one's going to be high too. So what do the widths look like now that we looked at the lengths? So this one's actually not too bad. However, if you remember from earlier in the video, we did have a gap underneath here that we will have to fix. And let's go check out the back. Now that's pretty darn good, and there's no gap along here if you take a look. So I won't actually have to dig down too much along here, thankfully. So the reason I use this sledgehammer first is because you can see this line running down here all the way to the back. And then you can see it along the back here. And you can't see it in some spots along here. So that means that's going to be a low spot. And then you can see another line along here. The reason I did that with the sledgehammer is because it very quickly shows me where I'm going to need to dig and where my high spots and where my low spots versus are. So instead of trying to dig up the whole thing, it's going to be a quick way, kind of a quick workaround. So the next step is to use the pitchfork and to go around and basically cut a perimeter all around, not cut the perimeter, but to kind of take away the soil from all around the perimeter of the garden bed so I can actually level it out properly. And if I was installing this on sod, which wouldn't be a problem, I would just want to use my work knife and do the exact same thing I would be doing with the pitchfork, except I would be wanting to cut the sod out on both sides of the garden bed of the perimeter, on both on the inside and the outside, and then I would remove that piece of sod afterwards, and then I would put the garden bed back down without that sod. And all those scraps of sod that I would have cut out along the perimeter, I would just toss them back inside the garden bed. But let's get started on leveling this guy out. So you can see, I basically just dug a U for where the garden bed's going to go. You can still see the imprint of the garden bed back here along there, the perimeter, where I hit it with a sledgehammer. However, I knew the front would be high, so I only basically dug out the front. And to be honest, I'm not too concerned about the initial depth, whether it be too deep or too shallow right away. My first thing is just to kind of get a feel of where I am. So the next step is to put the garden bed in place and see how we did on our first attempt of leveling. Timber! And yes, you do have to say timber when you throw down the garden bed like that. So now that I have the garden bed exactly where I want it, we're going to check out exactly how level it is. So you can see how much wider the trenches that I dug for the garden bed is than the actual perimeter. I did that because you could see that I had to play with it a little bit and kind of kick it into place. You kind of want that extra room, and then we're going to be backfilling later on. So let's check out this level. Now that's pretty close. And how about this one? And that's pretty good too. It's still a little high on this side over here. And how about this side? So that's pretty good too. So it's not quite exactly how I want it though, because I want it as level as possible. But since the bubble is just barely off like that, I'm not gonna bother to take the garden bed off and re-dig everything and put it back into place. That's just too much work. I'm gonna do it the easy way with a sledgehammer. Take a look. Doing it with a sledgehammer is way easier than lifting the garden bed up and down continuously and in and out of place. So if you've noticed though, every time I hit it with a sledgehammer, I took off the level beforehand because I didn't want to screw up the bubble inside it and make it out of level. And you can see my bubble is pretty much between the lines there. For me, that's good enough. It's right between the lines. It's still a little high on the front of the garden bed here. And let's check out this one. And that's right between the lines as well. And that's right between the lines there. So I would say this garden bed is pretty much good and level. The next two things I'm going to be doing is backfilling and putting cardboard. So now that the garden bed has been installed and leveled out exactly where I want it, my next step will be installing cardboard at the bottom. The reason for that is if let's say you're installing on top of sod or grass or anywhere that has any organic or any weed seeds, the cardboard's going to act kind of as a barrier to keep to kind of block all the light and to kill all the seeds before they have a chance to germinate. Some people put landscaping fabric in the bottom of their raised beds. However, that causes many issues down the line. Landscaping fabric will not let the roots go down past the bottom of the garden bed, especially if it's open like this. That's what you want. And then also the fabric won't let your worms and stuff like that come up from the soil from underneath. So if you lay cardboard, it's gonna be around for around 6 months or so. All the weeds are gonna kind of die off, same with the grass and everything. And then on top of that, you're gonna have soil. So it's gonna do its job, but it's gonna decompose over a little while, which will be great for the roots, that they'll be able to go straight through. And it also provide food for the worms and other bacteria in the soil. So if you were installing this over grass, you would have two options here. My option that I typically do, I just take a pitchfork like this, like the one that I was talking about earlier, and I rough up the grass. I just kind of dig it in there a little bit and just kind of rough it up. I'm not really trying to remove it, I'm just trying to kind of fluff it up. Another option would be to dig out the grass from all inside the garden bed and flip it upside down. Now, that's a lot of work. I don't want to do that if I don't have to. So typically I just, I rough it up and I throw cardboard on top of it. So now let's get started on cardboard. So I found the best places to get cardboard from is supermarkets. The apple and banana boxes are big enough that you can take them and pretty much just fold them in half, and there you already have 2 layers of cardboard. You want at least 2 thick layers laid down to prevent any seeds from germinating from underneath the cardboard. But you also want to avoid using brightly colored ink on the cardboard, because that's just going to leach into your soil. Another thing is you want to make sure all this tape that might be on your cardboard is removed before you put it in the bed, because that's not going to be breaking down in your soil over time. So as you can see, I've got a pretty good layer of cardboard throughout the bed. However, since I'm not covering up existing sod, I didn't put my cardboard right to the edge. If you were installing your beds on top of grass, sod, or any other type of ground cover, you'd really want to cover up as much as you can. And then that way the cardboard's going to block the light and actually kill it. And then with all the soil on the top, and you won't have too much of a problem with weeds that way. However, since my beds are just basically on top of fill, I just loosely laid it just kind of all the way around and then just kind of left it at that. I'm not too worried about it myself. So I've got this bed done, and part of this one, I've kind of ran out of cardboard at this point, so I'll have to get more. I didn't have enough for this one. And then I just need to level out this bed for the greenhouse, put some trellises along it and put some shelves up for it and move the greenhouse back over it. And then this project will be finished up. So that's our kind of basic guide of how to install your garden beds. Remember, they don't need to be perfectly level. However, if they are crooked like that, severely, or things like that, if you are watering from overhead, like with a sprinkler or with a hose, all your water is going to run downhill. So that means one end of your garden bed will always get saturated. We don't water overhead. We water by using drip irrigation. However, we still try to make them as level as possible because it just makes them easier to work in. And if you're wondering how we're going to be filling the garden beds behind me, make sure to subscribe to our channel because we will be doing a video about that shortly. So if you have any questions or comments or any suggestions of what we just explained, feel free to throw them in the comment section below, and we will make sure we address them. So don't forget to like and subscribe.